awesome.
Awesome.
That was awesome.
You guys are awesome.
No,
You're awesome.
You are awesome.
sir, you are awesome. Seriously.
Awesome. Awesome.
Awesome.
Everything is awesome.
Welcome to this week's edition of Everything is Awesome. I'm your host, Kev, and this is the show where we sit down and talk to awesome people about awesome things. Now, this week is episode 10, a big, epic milestone for podcasts. You may not think about it, but 10 episodes in is actually pretty good for podcasts. There are many podcasts that don't make it past 2-3 episodes. There's a lot more work that needs to go into a podcast that many people think about, especially long-form interview podcasts. That is something that I'm new to. I've never done a long-form interview podcast before. Usually it was just sitting around and talking about television shows or talking about news or entertainment news. This is my first long-form interview podcast, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. So to be 10 episodes in is awesome. It's a time to celebrate. At the same time as it's a time to celebrate, what we're celebrating this episode is failure. That's right. We are celebrating failure this week because I sat down, and this was supposed to be a show where I sat down and talked to the one, the only, the awesome Jeff Stormer from Party of One podcast. We were supposed to sit down this week, and we did. We sat down and chatted, and when I went back and listened to the episode, about 20 minutes in, less than that, he started answering me before I was asking questions or responding to me before I was talking. It was like he's one person who is all about his future self talking to his past self. Heck, if you listen to the last episode that he put out where it was a Doctor Who themed show that I was in, he actually has a TARDIS. I didn't even know this. He has a TARDIS. He's a man that's experienced with time travel. So maybe that was part of the issue, is that he just knew what I was going to say before I said it. But I went and listened to the episode I recorded with Jason Ashley from Too Cool for Tabletop. Same thing happened about 20 minutes in. My good friend Joe Kaliva, same thing happened there. And my new super friend, Derek Kanyas, who is a DJ and AIDS activist out of Georgia, I believe. Same thing happened with that episode. And my heart broke a little bit because that was a lot of time and effort that I put into the show. That was, for me, approximately 5.5, if not longer, hours of my life throughout the course of 2 or 3 weeks that I sat down and recorded and talked to these people. But worse than that was that these were all people who took time out of their day, at least an hour, 2 for some of them, and I had to come back to them and with my tail between my legs and say, hey, I'm sorry. The audio that I got from our interview is corrupt. Like it recorded you over top of me. I don't know what happened. I am so sorry. And it hurt to do that. Like I felt like an asshole. To be perfectly honest, I felt like a complete asshole. I wasted these people's times, and I felt horrible about it. But I went back to them. I asked them if they would all redo the show, and without any kind of hesitation, without any kind of them being upset. They didn't sound upset. There was no indication that they were pissed about this. They all 4 of them said, yes, absolutely. I enjoyed the show. It was so much fun that I will more than willing do it again. And that is such a cool feeling, that, I mean, in the 10 years of podcasting that I've been doing, I've had a lot of cool feelings. My first ever live show, at Doc Watson's, hitting, that first 100 people to download the show, the first 500 people, the first 1,000 people, going live and seeing thousands of people, millions of people watching the show, all these cool things. I don't think anything is as cool as having 4 people who you literally just talked to within the last 3 weeks say, yeah, absolutely, we'll do it again. We understand, it's not a big deal. We're getting ready to launch a Patreon page, and we'll explain more about that when we do it. But in the things that I'm starting to type, like I refer to our fans as super friends. And without a doubt, Jeff Stormer, Jason Ashley, Joe Kaliva, and Derek Kanyas are the first official members of my super friends, of Mike's super friends, of the whatever, the Crude Humor Studios super friends. Like, they are so awesome, so cool to do this. They were cool enough to say yes the first time, and now that they're saying yes a second time so soon after they already talked to me, it's just cool, and I can't thank them enough. And I've talked to some of them already, and have thanked them over and over and over again. So I just want to say that publicly to all four of them now that I'm recording this intro. It means a lot, guys. If I didn't say it to you before, I meant to. Regardless, like, this means the world to me that you were so willing to just come back on the show. It may not seem a lot to you guys, but it does mean a lot to me. So that being said, let's get some business out of the way. Make sure you check us out on awesomepodcast.com. I know right now that website just kind of takes you to a category page on thatentertains.com. I'm getting ready to revamp that. I have other things that I'm working on that I need to do, but that's a good place to go to just find all the past episodes of our show. And you should also be subscribing to us on iTunes, because that's another way that you can see our entire backlog of shows. While you're on iTunes, please, I know you're probably listening to this in your car and whatnot, but if you can just put a little mental note when you get to your desk or whatever, and when you're on iTunes subscribing to our podcast, just leave a quick review, and preferably 5 stars, but be honest. I'm hoping that even if there's some flaws to this show, that you see a lot of potential in it, and that you enjoy listening to all our guests. And that's cool, because iTunes has some sort of equation or algorithm that, the more reviews you have, the more higher star reviews you have, they start to feature it, or they put it higher up on the list when you search for things. And that's like kind of one of the things that I haven't done in the 10 years of my podcasting, is like seen my show featured on iTunes. And that would be like just super cool. And, I would really enjoy if all you super friends out there could do that. And while you're there, make sure you check out Jeff Stormer's podcast, Party of One Pod. He's a lifesaver. He told me of the software I should be using to help with recording remote podcasts. And he's just an excellent storyteller. I love everything that he does. The episode that he put out after my Doctor Who episode, I'm only about 10, maybe 15 minutes into it, and it's like, it's an emotional one. Like, it's an amazing little story that he's telling with his guest. Same thing with Jason Ashley, the host of Too Cool for Tabletop. While you're on iTunes, subscribe to his podcast. Another great, excellent storyteller, creator of worlds. Subscribe to his pods, leave some love for him on the reviews and ratings there. Joe Kaliva, who is not really known for podcasting, he's in a hiatus right now. He's thinking about bringing his podcast back shortly. But the Bluegrass Byway, go check that out on iTunes while you're there. Show it some love. And Derek Kanyas, I will have to get you his promotional stuff later, because he's a hard guy to find. Find him on Twitter. Just search his name and you'll see him. And hashtag, if you have something to say about AIDS, hashtag end stigma. He's a big activist in the AIDS community, and you'll hear a little bit about it today in this week's episode, because what we're going to do, this week's episode is kind of a what could have been episode. I'm treating it like a best of, pulling clips and putting it into the show here, but it's stuff that's never been out before. So instead of a best of, this is a what could have been. So I'm going to give you the first couple minutes of each episode that we had with one of these people, and just to get something out this week that you guys can listen to, and you can hear a little bit about each one of these guests, because they are super cool. I can't say that enough about them. So coming up first, and make sure you follow each one of them on Twitter, at Party of One Pod, at TCFT Podcast on Twitter, at Joe Kaliva on Twitter, and I'm hoping I'm getting this right, at DJ Rex85 on Twitter. Check them all out on Twitter, or search for them by name: Jeff Stormer, Jason Ashley, Joe Cleva, Derek Canas. That's Canas. And follow them on Twitter, show them as much love. Thank them for doing this show again so you can hear more of their stories or just hear more conversation. Jeff Stormer, we're in the process of trying to schedule something out for his return to Everything is Awesome. So he's going to be a little bit later in the schedule than we normally would have had him scheduled. But you're about to sit down and listen to Jeff Stormer talk about his origins in tabletop RPG, which include Middle-earth role-playing, and includes me kind of going back and forth with him about my origins and a lot more. So without further ado, here is a little portion of what should have been this week's guest, Jeff Stormer, right here, only on awesomepodcast.com. This week's guest is a first. It's a first in that it's the first person on this show I've talked to who I don't know. So it could be awkward. I don't know. We'll find out. But it's been a long time since I've sat down to talk to someone that I haven't been at least close to in some fashion. Him and I have sat down and talked once on his podcast, which we'll get to in just a moment. But the thing about the internet today is it opens up your mind to brand new things, and tabletop is huge now. And you know, thanks to Will Wheaton and his tabletop, and all these other podcasts out there doing their own thing. And it seems like tabletop RPG in particular for the podcast world is huge right now. And if it wasn't for his first episode that I happened to download, because I'm a completist, I need to listen to everything. If it wasn't for the wrestling theme and also his guest, Noah, who I met maybe a month before that at I Like to Movie Live event, I probably wouldn't have given this podcast a second listen. All the stars aligned because it was great, and I've listened to every episode since. I've been on an episode. Ladies and gentlemen, the king of one-shot tabletop, Jeff Stormer.
Hello.
So how are you doing? Thank you for doing the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is great.
So, I like to, this show, and you said you've listened, anyone that knows this show, we go on random tangents. I'm not going to hold you to your story. I like to, for you, the awesome thing I see is that you're kind of a tabletop player. You're a podcaster too, but we'll see where the story takes us. But I kind of want to start with your origin story. I want to start with, how did tabletop gaming become a thing for you?
Well, there's an interesting story there. It's a bit of a long story. There's some twists and turns, but I think it's a good one.
Yeah, if you know this podcast, twists and turns are that's
perfect.
Our niche.
So the story as I remember it, because it starts a long time ago. Is I was 8. I want to say between 8 and 10, because it would have been between like 96 and 98. So I was because this was at the time my family was living in like super rural Oklahoma.
Oh wow! So you're not from Pennsylvania or Philly?
Well,
originally.
I grew up. We moved born in Colorado. We moved to New Jersey, like central New Jersey, around when I was very, very young, like 2 or 3, maybe earlier than that. And I grew up. I spent most of my life in Jersey, and then moved to Philly about like 5-6 years ago. But there was a period in the middle where I lived in a few different places: Kansas, Oklahoma, Ohio. And then I went to school in Ohio, like college school.
Okay, that's interesting. That's an interesting, and that's a story we can get into later. We don't have to. Let's talk tabletop. So 8 or 9,
super rural Oklahoma, and my brother. The story that I remember, it was my brother had a copy of I was really into video. I love video games. I should establish that I love video games, but I'm not very good at them. Yeah,
okay, I can feel.
But the thing that I've always been really into, I've always had a weird fascination with video game like guide manuals, and I couldn't explain it as a child, but I just loved reading video game manuals.
That's interesting. I want to say I'm the same way. I don't necessarily like reading the game manuals, but me and my buddies were all super into the Final Fantasy series. And my one buddy in particular, we would every summer just basically hang out all the time and play the American Final Fantasy 2, which is Final Fantasy 4. And he'd play, and back in the day, these manuals almost had like a strategy guide in the end of it. and I would like read the manual. It was weird. I've always been more
I'm
of a
exactly the
watcher.
same
Like
way.
I love playing video games. But yeah, and that's what like today's video games are. I'm like the cinematic, the like Last of Us is more of a story. I could sit there and watch all the cutscenes and be
Oh, absolutely.
completely satisfied.
They're beautiful nowadays. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I will forgive. I can even forgive bad graphics
Yeah.
for good story. That's in any medium. If you give me a good story, it doesn't have to be perfect acting. It doesn't have to be perfect writing. It doesn't have to be perfect graphics.
Tell me a good
Give me
story. If you can tell a good enough story, you can basically wipe away any, hiccup in your story.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, so and my brother had a copy of this book that it said on it. I like snuck up behind him while he was playing a video game and saw that he had this book that said on it, Middle Earth Role Playing Game. And I remember being a big fan of role playing games because they had like big elaborate maps and monsters on them. Like I was big into like Dragon Warrior and
Exactly.
stuff. So I stole it. Like I snatched it
Yeah,
and
yeah.
ran and hid somewhere and started flipping through it. And like I eventually like I started flipping through it. None of it made sense to me. I eventually would read it cover to cover. None of it would make sense to me still because the thing is, as I would learn as I got older, Middle Earth Role-Playing is an insanely complicated tabletop role-playing game that was designed for, like, people that didn't think that Dungeons & Dragons had enough enough percentile dice in it.
Oh.
Yeah,
So
it
for
was
the
it's such
uber
an uber
nerd.
nerd game. Like, there's probably 100 pages of charts in it to determine, like, critical hits, to determine,
wow.
like, you chop their tongue off. Now they can't speak anymore. And I actually reread the game not long ago, maybe last summer, and I still chunks of it where I'm like, I was 8. What was I doing here?
I can only imagine just today. So my history in tabletop is like I've only played a handful of times, as I told you on your show. And once was like back in high school. So this was, I think it was ninth grade. So this is back in like 98-ish, I guess. A teacher had like a D&D club, or wanted to start a D&D club, and me and like a handful of friends went to it, but no one took it seriously, so I bailed, and most of my buddies bailed. Then we played one other time at some point in our lives.
Sure.
Again, not taken seriously, so we bailed. And then I've played one other time before. Everyone took it seriously to a degree, but it wasn't much prep work, so I kind of got angry and left. And then, and mind you, this was like within the last year, so I mean, like I was 30, so I acted like a child at 30. And today I just created a new character because I'm going back to that group because we kind of have some podcast plans for the D&D games now. Thanks to, in part to you and one of your previous guests, Jason Ashley from Two Fools and Tabletop.
I gotta have him back on the show. I've been thinking about that. He's so nice and so cool. Yeah,
yes, he and him and I have been going back and forth on emails to get him on this show. And but because of you guys, like I'm like I really want to go back to this whole idea. And we had years ago had the idea of podcasting D&D. Like before it was cool, we had the idea. We just never did it. We could never find the group to do it. And now we're taking it to the next level. Like maybe we can do it live. And that's a whole nother story. But I was like, I want to get into it. Like let's do my character sheet. And like I did part of it with my buddy who's the DM, and then I did part of it on my own afterwards. And I was completely lost on 4th edition character creation, and I don't know how complicated it really is to like an average person or just a tabletop player in general. But my mind was blown how much I had to do. So I can only imagine if Middle Earth RPG is more intense. That's insane.
And here's the thing: I was 8 years old. I had not read I had not read anything Middle Earth. So I had no idea what any of it meant. I only knew, like, what an elf was because they showed up in video game. Like, I knew, like, the basics. But, like, the thing is, it gets so insanely detailed about the minutia of things in Middle Earth. I will always remember that my first character that I rolled up, and I rolled him up wrong in like a million ways that I didn't realize until really last summer when I went back into the game. was a black Numenorian. And I don't know if you remember the black Numenorians from Lord of the Rings, but they are mentioned they're mentioned in like 2 lines,
I do not.
maybe. Like, they're not a thing.
Okay.
They're literally,
Okay.
yeah, it's insane the level
Yeah,
of like
that's
3-page descriptions of a race that shows up half a time.
all right, and we're back. Thanks yet again, Jeff. You were you are so cool. You're a super friend in many ways. You are the first podcast I've been a guest on in over 2 or 3 years at this point. You had me lost in the story of the Doctor Who game we played. You're just that good of a storyteller. You lose me every week in what you do with your podcast and the stories that you tell. And you know, it's rare that I need tech advice because I'm a tech guy, but like you came in with a life-saving application to record podcasts with guys like you who we can't be in the same studio with. So thanks to Jeff for being on the show a few weeks ago, or for recording a few weeks ago, for having me on his show, and for coming back in a few weeks to re-record his interview. Make sure you check him out on Twitter at partyofonepod.com. Go to iTunes, download his show, rate, review, subscribe. Coming up next, Jason Ashley, who I heard of through Jeff's podcast, Party of One. Jason Ashley hosts the popular tabletop RPG podcast, Too Cool for Tabletop. And it's really a really cool show. I'm not going to really get into the what the show's about. It's about tabletop RPGs. He runs a campaign, but that's something that I want to talk about in our actual interview that you didn't get to hear in this clip coming up. But we do get into some important things like storytelling, because he is an excellent storytelling, and his origins into tabletop, which is Magic the Gathering leading to D&D. He has a theory that video games will lead you into being a serial killer. It's a pretty funny theory. And then he talks a little bit about being a player versus a dungeon master. So without further ado, here's the one and the only, the creator of worlds, another great storyteller, Jason Ashley from Too Cool for Tabletop. This week's guest, we kind of teased last week when we talked to Jeff Stormer from Party of One. He came up in conversation because he's been on the other show and he was scheduled to be on this show. And stars had to align for me to listen to Party of One, listen to this episode that our guest was on, and be able to I don't know if it was the fact that the guest had his own tabletop RPG podcast that I've been getting into recently, or if the story was just that good, or all of it combined led me to go check out his podcast. And it was close enough to Party of One where it was started off as one-shot adventures that it caught my attention. It was familiar, but it was different enough to be unique, to set it aside from Party of One, where it included more people, where you can get more in-depth story, more character development, and it just captured my imagination. This week we have another great storyteller on, another creator of worlds, if you will. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from Too Cool for Tabletop, Jason Ashley. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And I do want to say one thing Kevin is probably too nice to tell you, is that I totally bailed on him before when I was supposed to record. But we managed to make this work. I didn't bail. I'm here, and we're doing it, and I'm pretty pumped.
Yeah, you know what? I've been doing podcasting for, I don't know, almost 10 years. And in various different shows. And I'm at the point at I'm 31, I'll be 32, where I'm just a patient man. I just email a bunch of people or text a bunch of people and say, do you want to be on the show? And then it all falls together. So I'm in no rush. I don't feel like you bailed. I was going to give you another week before I emailed you and harassed you again.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things, like whenever we do our podcast, the people that are on my show, my regulars, I am like militant. I'll send them emails and Facebook messages, and we have a Facebook group for orchestrating timelines. And I'm like, you will be here. We will start at this time, yada, yada, yada. Like, that is me. And then for me to completely skip a day and then email you the next morning, like, hey, so I forgot I was going to be on your show. Like, that's just not me at all. So I don't know what happened, but you've been a gracious host. So thank you for not holding it against me.
Not a problem. And you know what? It's two different worlds. You have a whole universe that you're trying to, tell a story for. And I am interviewing people and not very good at it. I just like to talk. So
I feel like that's the only
two different
prerequisite
worlds.
for a podcast is you just have to like to talk, and then you can do a podcast. Like that's all it takes.
It's and this is I'm a Kevin Smith fan, so
Gotcha.
I go with his philosophy. If you're everyone's a storyteller. So if you're passionate about something, you can pick up a microphone and have a podcast. And now's the time to do it because it's not regular
That's true.
money. So let's get into you and why you're awesome and what awesome things you do. Let's kind of, and I think based off of some, I dived in to Too Cool for Tabletop from episode 1. Because I'm a completist. I need to, especially with what you're doing, it's a story. You need to start at episode 1. So I dived in and I binged it in about a week or two because it captured my imagination. And there was a bonus episode, I believe, where you kind of went into some history of you and tabletop. But for the new listeners of your show, for my listeners, let's go to your origin story of tabletop gaming.
My origin story is very simple, and it's a story I love to tell. But essentially, I mean, I was never into tabletop games, Magic the Gathering, D&D, Risk, anything like that. Like that was not me. Middle school, high school, never, ever once. Even really through college, I never did it. Right when I got out of college, I moved back to my hometown, and every Friday it was like, let's get together and do something. And all my friends were like, oh, we're playing Magic, we're playing Magic, we're playing Magic. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go buy a starter deck just so that I can have something to do with these people on Friday. Well, I made the mistake of winning my first ever game, so then I was hooked and was like, if I could have this sense of superiority every time I play this game, I've got to keep playing. So I got really hooked on that, and one night we were playing, and I made the joke about, what are we going to do next? Play Dungeons & Dragons? Cut to about 2 months later, and we're all playing Dungeons and Dragons. I'll never forget my first character ever was an elf rogue named Asgaratha. I was a dual dagger-wielding badass, and I still love that character to this day. But we started playing that, and then ended up making some jokes about if we were going to start LARPing next because of what happened with Magic and then D&D. And then that's kind of where this story comes to its conclusion is that's when I kind of came up with this theory. Like you start with video games, you gradually move into like Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, whatever card game is your poison, then into Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and tabletop games, then into LARPing, and then that final step is you just commit and become a serial killer. I feel like that's where it goes to. Like that's the trajectory. Once you get there, you've completed it and it's done. So I haven't made it to LARPing, so I'm still slow to get to that phase, but I'm working on it.
So the world is still safe for
a
you
while.
And
For a while at least.
That is almost like the path I took to. Now, my experience with tabletop gaming is minimum at best, but it is exactly kind of how you described it. Like it starts off with video games, and it goes all the way back to the original Final Fantasy on regular Nintendo for me. And then following that series for years and decades even, and then I was a Magic the Gathering player. As a we'll say teenager, maybe preteen, and that I actually just picked that back up because my brother-in-law wanted to start
you got
playing.
to be careful, man.
Like,
It's like World of Warcraft. Like you can't just play sometimes. You have to like commit and get into it. Because that's why I had to quit playing Magic. Is because one Friday someone shows up with this OP deck and just destroys everybody. So during that next week until you play again, you're putting cards together and we're going to the card shop. And I was spending like $100, $200 a week. And it got so expensive. Like I legitimately probably spent $1,000 at a card shop in the period of 30 days. And I'm like, I have to spend $1,000 just to feel superior to my friends. Like there's something wrong with that. There's got to be a cheaper way to feel better and make myself feel better than them. So I don't know.
Yeah, for me, so as a teenager when I played, I didn't have that because you know,
Oh,
you don't have money as
sure.
a teenager. But as a 31-year-old and with income, literally we bought intro decks like you and started playing, and then my brother-in-law, he went above and beyond me. Like, he bought a couple boxes of boosters. I bought 1.5. I split a box with him and bought one on my own. And we haven't played in a while just because, you know, our kids are starting to play baseball and stuff. So it's life is getting too busy during the baseball season. But I have a feeling once the summer's over, we're gonna be back at it again.
Yeah, I made the joke to one time I started playing Magic the Gathering. I was like, leave it to us to take a game where a pack of cards costs $2 and turn it into a $100 a week addiction. Like, I don't know how that happens just so effortlessly from me, but oh well.
It happens for me. My poison is comics. I have to not go to a comic book store, otherwise I will be spending $30 a week, if not more. So over $100 a month.
Yeah, I think I just can't leave the house. Like, if I have money that can be spent, I just can't leave the house, and someone has to go on our router and like block Amazon so that I can't get to it, and then I'll be okay.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to where I'm given an allowance. I'm only told I can spend X amount of money.
I'm in the allowance train. I hear you.
Yeah, and really, like, when I'm not physically somewhere, I have a lot of willpower. So the digital world, like, I don't have to I go to Amazon, I look at everything I want, but I know, I'm not going to buy it. I don't have to. I don't
that
see
impulse is not there right in front of you.
Yeah. And then for Magic the Gathering, just like you, it went to Dungeons and Dragons. However, for me, we had a teacher in high school that was like wanted to start a club, a D&D club. And me and a buddy tried it out, and no one took it seriously. So we're like, all right, whatever, we'll leave it alone. And I think I've played maybe 2 times since then. And again, never really taken seriously. The first time I played and got taken seriously was on Party of One. And that fueled me. So, like, I spent my entire day today, when I should have been working, creating a character for this campaign I'm joining on Saturday. So it is, D&D, when you're in that mindset, is an addicting kind of, you want to just hammer
away.
the story.
Like, one thought leads to another thought. Like, you have some imaginative idea about this one thing and it just blows up. Like, I have to make sure I've got at least a clean slate as far as a schedule goes. If I'm going to sit down and start working on lore or something homebrew or make a character or an NPC, whatever, I need to have some time, because it's never just make that one thing. If I'm like, I'm going to draw a little map of a dungeon, before the night's done, I've drawn my dungeon map, also the area that leads into the dungeon, the area that leads out of the dungeon, who built the dungeon, when the dungeon was built, why it was built. Like, you can't stop. It's so hard to stop.
My buddy who's the DM showed me all the maps he was working on, the ones that he could show the players. And it is insane how much detail a DM can get into for the story. So I think it's probably self-explanatory, but it sounds like D&D was your first
D&D 2.5, AD&D. That was the first ever that I played, and we played a campaign that never really ended, or we never finished it. At least we probably played for about 6 months, and I'm talking like I would show up at this dude's house at like 8 p.m. and we'd play till like 6 in the morning a couple nights a week. Like, that is what we did.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was. I was lucky enough. I was single at the time, obviously, very obviously.
Yeah.
So I'd get off work, eat something at home, go to the beer store, go to my friend's house, and that is what we did, because I could have done it every single day. I would have done it. I was so into it.
So you got
like by the first game. By the time our first game was done, very similar to what you were describing. The first time we played was the guy who was going to be our DM. We went to his house. There was like 10 of us trying to play. It was me, some friends, their girlfriends, and what have you. No one was taking it seriously but me, and I was taking it very seriously. I was trying to do all this stuff, and everyone else was just completely ignoring the DM and just doing their own thing. So when that was done, I remember I took him aside and I was like, can we do this again, but like for real? And I will tell me what I have to do. Do I have to pay you? Do I need to bring something? What can I do to keep doing this?
as a player, well, I'll ask you this: do you prefer playing
I don't
or
know.
DMing?
I don't even remember what it's like to play a character. I've been DMing.
Oh wow.
God, I mean, see, you mentioned that you didn't have a whole lot of experience with tabletop games. This is going to make me sound like the biggest poser in the whole damn world, but neither do I. Like, I am not very well versed. Like, I've played D&D 2.5, 5th edition, Dungeon World, Lasers and Feelings, Everyone is John, and like one other game, Lady Blackbird. I've played for 6 games total, and I haven't even played for that long. Like, this is maybe 5 or 6 years now. But it's one of those things that like it got me and I got hooked to it. But I liked playing a character when I was playing a character as far back as I can remember from that. I like not being responsible for everything else. And in particular, the guy who was our DM, well, he was a very good DM, very acute sense of detail. Like, you could go into a tavern and I could be like, how many tables? And he would have the number of tables written down. All the tables would have 4 chairs, except for these 2 tables only have 2 chairs. I mean, this guy knew his stuff, so it was very easy to be drawn into the world. I don't know, living that world and exploring it and learning it for myself as a character was really fun. But I think it was really once I started being a DM myself that's what really got me finally hooked. That was like the nail in the coffin, if you will. That's what really pulled me in, I think.
All right, we're back again. Thanks to Jason Ashley for being on the show. Not only for being on the show a couple weeks ago, it's now my turn to mess things up. You heard him right there say that, I was gracious, the gracious host, because like I ignored the fact that we had miscommunication and whatnot. Now it's my turn to apologize to him and say, I'm sorry that we have to do this again, but I can't wait to sit down and talk with Jason again. We're getting right. We're even closer to scheduling something out, within the next week or 2 here. So he'll be coming up very shortly in the lineup of shows. And I can't wait to sit down and talk to him because, again, he is an excellent storyteller, just like Jeff, just like all these other great game masters out there. And his concept for his show is an excellent one. And we chat every now and then outside of podcasting. Now, here's what's really cool about, I go on about this in other podcasts. Here's what's cool about me doing this show and sitting down and talking to either other podcasters or just interesting people. Like, I've formed friendships now. Like, Jeff and I are talking about doing something together at some point. Like, even he doesn't know what that means. Like, we just have a very small idea that's kind of percolating before we can make it into a bigger idea. But like, I want to work with Jeff. I mean, I talk to Jeff, when I can, and I listen to all his stuff, and like, I consider him a super friend. He is a super friend, and I can't wait to work more with him. Same thing with Jason Ashley. I consider him a super friend now. Like, he's cool. Like, he's doing me a solid. And I hope that he, in some way, I can return the favor to him and help him out with something, be a guest on his show or, whatever else he comes out with in the future. Just an awesome dude. Like, I loved talking to these guys, loved meeting these guys, and I hope to work with them in some capacity in the future. That being said, let's go on to someone who I have worked with in the past, may work with again in the future, someone that I've known since the beginning of my podcasting career, practically. 10 years ago, I started podcasting. That's an epic feat. Like, if you told me 10 years ago that I was going to podcast for 10 years, I'd said, you're out of your mind. 10 years ago, I was still kind of in the mindset that I was going to be a wrestler. So, and I did that for a long time, probably 6 years, 7 years, something like that. But to think that I've been doing this, talking to a microphone for 10 years is kind of cool. Like, that's a third of my life that I've been podcasting. That's amazing. And I've known, Joe Kaliva for 10 years, and, we haven't talked for a couple years, but like, anytime that, I have something cool going on, and we usually interact on Twitter or Facebook a little bit. And, it was cool that he, after 10 years of knowing him, that he hasn't, gotten too big for me. Like, he's still willing to sit down and chat with me about things. And he was one of the guys that I wasted 2 hours of his time when we first sat down and talked. And I felt horrible. Over 2 hours. And I felt horrible about it. And again, just like Jeff, just like Jason, he instantly said, yes, absolutely. I'll do the show. If you just need someone to talk to when you don't have a guest lined up, like I'll come do the show. We'll shoot the shit. So Joe was more than happy to do it. What you're going to hear is part of a conversation that I didn't expect when we sat down and talked. And that was, us talking about podcasting, and you don't get the full story. I think we kind of revisit. Him and I have already sat down and re-recorded his conversation. So next week's episode from today will be part 1 of our conversation, and then we did get into a part 2 of our conversation with Joe. So episodes 11 and 12 will feature Joe Kaliva. That's in the next 2 weeks. You'll be getting those 2 episodes. And we get the origins of his nickname in this little mini clip, Cosmo Joe Kaliva. It's a funny little story. We talk podcasting, something that, and we didn't revisit it in the conversation we recorded. I just got to say this now, is that we went into unexpected territories, when we first sat down and talked. Like we got into like parenting advice and just like weird conversations that if you asked me 10 years ago, I would have told you you're out of your mind. So such a cool conversation with Joe that, I guess the one benefit of losing some of these conversations I had with Jeff, Jason, Joe, and Derek is that they are now just a special moment in time that I had with each one of these super friends of mine. And that's something that I think we take for granted in today's world, is just that we want to capture everything. We want to take pictures. We want to take video. We want to take audio. We want to capture everything. And sometimes we forget that it's just living in the moment is what's important. So, the one positive I've taken away from losing all this stuff is that for 4 people for over 5 hours of my life, I got to capture a moment in my time, that you're getting a little glimpse of, but the rest of the conversation is mine and Joe's, or mine and Jason's, or mine and Jeff's, or me and Derek's. So that's cool. Like I do have that. Like I got to know these people on a deeper level, and I think that you'll see something in our next conversation about that. So I'm babbling. Let's get to Joe. Here is Joe Kaliva, the origins of Cosmo Joe, and some podcast talk right here, only on awesomepodcast.com. So I've had the pleasure over the last almost 10 years of podcasting to meet an array of people. And it's so awesome in that time frame when you can reach out to them and they don't say no to you. And that's this week's guest is kind of a throwback to how we used to do podcasting, between me and Santoro and Jonesy and Jay and all my past co-hosts, which used to be a very music-oriented world, which is not me. If you know me, you know this podcast or any other podcast I've done. I'm not really a music guy. I'm a talky guy. My phone filled with podcasts. But there's something about, I don't know if you want to call it indie music or unsigned. I don't know what it is. I call it indie is what I call it. And there's something about that, whether it's local Philly or it's anywhere in the world that you would consider indie, it always grabs my attention. That's the music I listen to. And one of my first friends and contacts in that world was our guest today, who I think was him and his band or whatever they were. They were our maybe third ever interview or third episode interview. And I don't know if he even talked on that show or if it was the front lady. Is that what we would call her? I think that's a good title. We can call it the artist. The front lady. But eventually he became part of what I'll dub the HHWST family. And he is, still a friend today, I'm glad to say. Ladies and gentlemen, he's going to kill me for reminding him of this nickname, Cosmo Joe Kaliva, right here on Everything Is Awesome. Thanks for doing the show, man.
Thank you. Now that you reminded me of that nickname, I think I'm going to have to go now. I completely, you know what, man? As soon as you said he's going to kill me for reminding me of this nickname, it just came back to me that quick. I was just like, oh, no. I guess we'll have to explain that nickname later. So this goes back to, like, month 1 of the HHWST show, Happy Hour with Steel Tip. So the way Joe and I met was through, was it the Shannon Cole band? Was that the name of it? I was kind of a manager / band leader and doing artist development for an independent artist, like you said, named Shannon Cole. And honestly, man, I can't remember how you first contacted us, but I remember, I think, like you said, you kind of did a lot of focus on indie bands, indie music, and I think she just kind of popped up on your radar.
Yeah, something. So Santoro was the producer for that show, and he's the one that booked all the guests that we had. I say that like we had a plethora. It was a select few, all local Philadelphia people, and somehow we got hooked up with you guys, and we interviewed you on the show, and then that somehow led to. What was it? The City of Brotherly Love show?
Yeah, that's right. The City of Brotherly Love show. And that was at the Trocadero at the right. Okay. Yep. Yes. And
then that's when we all kind of clicked and became friends and whatnot. And somewhere between there and was it Doc Watson's?
Good old
Doc Watson's. We did what is my first ever, only ever. I wouldn't call it a live podcast. We kind of emceed the event, I guess. But it was like a mixture of our podcast and you guys doing music and inviting all your other musicians on to perform the show. Somewhere in between Brotherly Love, Doc Watson's, Jonesy and Santoro developed. I wasn't part of this. They developed the nickname Cosmo Joe.
Yeah, well, no. Okay, so I'm going to have to set the record straight here. So yes, you just brought back a whole lot of memories in a very short amount of time there, man. Playing the Trocadero, the City of Brotherly Love show, Doc Watson's that Shannon played very frequently, and we did shows there. But I remember one specific show you guys. It was, and I'm not going to remember the name of the venue, but it was down in Old City, and you guys came out, and I guess I can say it now. She's maybe the statute of limitations has run out, but Shannon was under 21 at the time, and you guys came out to the bar, and we were doing some shots, and I think. Yeah, multiple rounds of shots. I think that was the first time I ever had kamikazes. You guys introduced me to that, but so we, after we finished our show, we decided that we need to carry on this partying and go to another bar down the street. But at that bar, it wasn't so easy to get Shannon a drink. So I had to order it for her, and we said, okay, what do you want to drink? And I'll just order it, and then you can drink it. And she said, I'll get, I want one of those Cosmopolitans, because I guess Sex and the City was big at the time, and she had heard about Cosmopolitans. So, not knowing what a Cosmopolitan was, I just looked the bartender straight in the eye, and I said, yeah, like, hey man, can I get a Cosmopolitan? And he just looked at me, and man, I haven't seen one episode of Sex and the City. I didn't even know what the Cosmopolitan was, and he just pauses and he goes, "For you." And I said, "Yeah, for me." And and then you guys quickly jumped on the because I think you guys took a picture. I don't even know where it was posted, because was this pre-Facebook? I don't even remember.
It was definitely Facebook. May have been. We were big on MySpace. I say big. Yeah, but MySpace was the thing back then. Because this is almost
it had
10
to be at
years
least
ago,
2005, 2006, somewhere around. Yeah, God.
It was because I don't know if I've what. So this show originated as a show like, hey, let's talk to other podcasters. But then I realized the pool of people I can talk to is really small, so I opened it up. So I had a couple people on, and I keep on going into the history of me and podcasting, and I want to say we've discovered that around June of 2006 is when we did like a pilot and then by that fall we started, because I think the show ended before 2007.
Because I remember, there was another reiteration. And hey, man, I'm glad that you kind of brought that up, because I'll say this, that I guess prior to 2006, I kind of had heard the term podcasting, and I didn't know what it was, but I wasn't really big into podcasting. But being on your show, speaking to you about it really kind of ignited my curiosity and my love of it. And Then I became, in all honesty, man, I mean, I can probably hold my phone up to the screen right now and show you my list of podcasts, but I am really a podcast junkie. I mean, I got really big into photography around 2009, and I basically was taught through photography podcasts. I listen to entertainment podcasts and the music podcasts. So you really kind of, like I said, ignited that fire, man. And, to the point where I mentioned right before we started taping that I actually tried hosting my own podcast about a year ago. And if it achieved nothing, it definitely gave me more of an appreciation and love for the amount of work and passion that goes into doing these things.
There is so much work going into a podcast for the majority of people, where you don't the return isn't. Right. I don't want to say the return isn't great, but essentially the return isn't great. Like what 10 years of podcasting has taught me is just do it for yourself and do it for the love. Like I just love sitting down and talking to people, and that's kind of the concept of this show. It's like, let's sit down and talk to interesting people. Like whether you do, like you're a musician, so like most of the people I talk to are going to have something that they do and want to promote, obviously. But like I have a buddy who lives down in Alabama that I just love talking to him about the South. Yeah. So like that's a show to me. So that's like after 10 years of like egos got in the way of Happy Hour with Steel Tip. And then egos got in the way of every other show. And then at some point it was like, hey, let's try to do a podcast network for money, and let's like make money off of this. And you'll never be happy if you're a podcaster doing that. Like that's what I've learned. You kind of have to just go into it and say,
it's absolutely true. And that's where my podcast was kind of born out of. About 2 years ago, I got really into bluegrass music, which, I think probably like most people, I would hear the term bluegrass and I would just think of, old men in overalls sitting on back porches with bloodhounds. And then, man, as soon as I really kind of gave it the time of day and a little bit of attention, and I said, "What? It's a virtuosic, unbelievable style of music." And as a musician, and especially as somebody that appreciates independent music, it's completely independent. And I don't know, whatever. I just really kind of got super engrossed into it. And so one of the first things I did, being a podcast junkie, was go on the podcast store and look up bluegrass podcasts. And one, I found that there was none that I was looking for. I was looking for like podcasts like this that were more like long form interview. I wanted to find out more about the artists and their history and their workflow and their process. And there was nothing out there. And anything that was out there kind of stereotyped it. It was kind of like, guys talking in false accents and, it's bluegrass hour here, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh God, this is, I'm looking for something that like takes it out of that stereotype, and shows it for what it really was. So after not finding anything, I was like, well, screw it. I'm going to do it myself, and I do have to admit, I mean,
there you go.
I did think a little bit like, how hard can it be? So I learned quickly it's very hard because, people only hear the end product where, you and I are sitting here talking, but there's the hours beforehand where you're contacting guests for, to set up the interview, then doing the interview, then editing the interview, then posting it, then marketing it, and all that stuff.
Okay. Welcome back to Everything is Awesome. I'm Kev, if you haven't been paying attention to this. As I said, this is the What Could Have Been episode. We've just listened to 3 clips, probably about averaging 10 to 12 minutes apiece, of past guests that were on that were so cool to come here and just kind of, do the show, for me, with me, and they're willing to come do it again because things just got messed up. So big shout out to Joe Cleva. He is definitely someone that will be on the show again. He's someone I've known for 10 years, as I said before. Someone that I hope to work with in some capacity. But definitely a cool guy. We had another cool conversation that you'll get to hear over the next 2 weeks on episode 11 and 12. So stay tuned for that, coming up in the next couple weeks. Coming up next is the final interview that I had issues with. And that was with this guy who hit me up. And you'll hear me say this in when I intro him to the little clip that you're about to hear. But like, that was another cool milestone. of someone coming to me and saying, I want to be on your show. Can I be on your show and talk about what I want to talk about? And that's DJing, that's AIDS activism. A lot of cool things. It's just a super cool moment in my 10-year podcasting. I think the fact that all 4 of these guys were just so cool to come back and say, yes, we'll absolutely redo that show. I think is the coolest moment in my podcasting career of over 10 years. But this is a very, before this happened, this was my number one cool moment of him coming to me. So what we're going to get into is actually probably one of the most serious conversations I've ever had. And that is about Derek and about, something he was born with and having to go through some open heart surgery and having to deal with pacemakers and having to deal with HIV and AIDS. And, it's a really serious conversation. And, him and I are scheduled to talk, in a couple of days. So he'll probably end up being episode 13. So you'll see him in about 3 weeks here. But, and we're going to talk and be serious again and then probably get into some, little lighter stuff and whatnot. But like, this is an important topic. Like, just because he's the 4th one in the line here, I'm doing this in the order that I recorded, originally. Doesn't mean he's last, but certainly not least. He is, has an important message, and make sure you check him out on Twitter. I mean, he's big in AIDS activism and, hashtag end stigma, man. Like, he has some important stuff to say, and, I guess I just can't stress how important it is. Super cool dude. He's a super friend. You've been listening to Everything is Awesome, only on awesomepodcast.com. Check out Derek. Now, we'll be back one more time to exit the show. Now, this week's guest is going to be a important guest, and a special guest even, because, I'm sure he'll have other reasons for it to be, but for me, it is the first guest in my 10-year podcasting career that has come to me to do an interview or be a guest on the show. And that's just like one of those cool, in 10 years in, as we've said in the previous weeks, talking to some people about podcasting and stuff, I look at little milestones here and there much differently now than I did 10 years ago. 10 years ago is about numbers, and now it's about cool things like this, where I don't necessarily have to hunt someone down to come on the show. Someone's like, you know what, this sounds like a cool idea, I want to be on it. And that's this week's guest. He's also a DJ, an AIDS activist, so expect this interview to get serious probably at times, which is a change of pace, though last week we got serious with parenting advice, I guess. I think I told my guest, but I'll let him know now. And as my listeners know, I do zero prep because I feel like that gives us a better, more authentic conversation. So without much further ado, Derek, and I'm going to butcher your last name, Canas? Canas. Okay. Welcome to the show. Thanks for not only being on the show, but for coming and reaching to me.
No problem, man. I've seen the website and all the stuff you guys do. It's really awesome.
So I'm going to kind of go a different direction than I normally go, because you are one of the few guests that, as I assume active you are in the public, I could find very little on you without reading your Twitter timeline or reading your Facebook page that you sent me. Usually I go to a website to get some more details. So I want to go to you to go to the starting point, since I would imagine there's kind of 2 areas that you may want to focus on, whether it's the AIDS activism, the DJing. I'm sure one leads to the other. Go to your origin point. Let's get to know you.
Well, when I was 3 months of age, I had my family found out I had a heart problem that was needed open heart surgery, and so I was sent to a hospital, and I had open heart surgery in 1985, and I required 15 cut blood transfusions throughout the course of surgery and recovery. And at the end of all that, I also got a pacemaker. So I am a battery operated DJ on top of everything else.
I guess that could be, if I'm assuming after all these years you can spin that as a kind of a cool thing.
Oh yeah, I use that to my advantage all the time.
So, what? So, is there? I don't know. This is where you'll see, and my fans will see my weak interviewing skills. So you get the pacemaker at 3 months of age. How does that? Because I don't at 31. If you were to tell me, yeah, I got a pacemaker when I was in my 20s, I don't know what that means. Like, do you need to, with a better term, get recharged every so months, especially as a child?
And no, they don't recharge them. They actually have to go in and do surgery again and replace the entire thing. I'm actually on my 4th one now.
Okay, so is that something, now obviously I would imagine the younger you are and the older you are, that's something that they have to be very careful of. So is there, I guess, did you have, like, how long do they last?
And they can last anywhere between 7 to 10 years, depending on how often they have to step in and intervene with your heart acting up, because it's basically there to keep your heart from having random pulsing beats and different things that tries to just keep you on a steady rhythm and pace. And my heart's terrible at doing that, so mine lasts about 6-7 years.
So, did they ever, like, is there a reason, I guess that's just a birth defect, or was there, like, a reason that at so young you had a hole in your heart?
No, it wasn't a hole. It was called transposition of the great arteries. I was what was known in the 80s as a blue baby. I don't know if you remember that term, but I was getting unoxygenated blood back to my body. And so they went in and corrected that by, they've actually pretty much kind of cut the top of the heart and reversed the flow of the blood back. And when they did the surgery, they interrupted what is known as the stenotic node, which is the electrical system of the heart. And that's what led to me needing a pacemaker.
Okay, so I would imagine that after all these years, we'll say, I guess 85, so you're probably about 30 years going on 31. You're almost an expert at this, I would imagine, at this condition, at the pacemaker and whatnot.
Oh yeah, I've been through it. I've seen I can read all my own reports and stuff. It's I don't really need the doctors around. Like, if they do the test, they can just hand me the folder.
So how does that affect you growing up? Like, obviously, I mean, I guess as a baby, you only know what your parents and family told you, but once, I guess, you around when maybe you got your first swap out, is probably around the age you can start remembering things. And so how did that affect you?
I mean, it really wasn't bad. I grew up so much in hospitals. I was always around adults, so I've always been kind of above everybody else on a mental level when it came to that, with the ability to talk and speak to people, because I was always talking to doctors. When I was 7, 8 years old, I knew everything that was wrong with my heart, and I could go in and, a doctor never, questioned what I knew, because they knew I knew what I was talking about.
So, but did it affect you? And these are probably just ignorant questions, because I don't know anyone with a pacemaker. It's not in my life immediately at the moment. Does it affect you, I guess, physically? Like, does it limit you?
Yes, it does, because it has parameters. Or mine actually does, where it has a lowest heartbeat that I can get to and a maximum heartbeat. So if I get up and I decide I want to go work out, I don't get to do a whole lot of high intensity stuff, because if I start getting above 120 beats a minute, pacemaker kicks in and will immediately start pulling my heart back down below that to not let it overwork itself. It sees that as an issue. So I constantly have to keep myself in check with what I can and can't do physically.
And it sounds like even at a young age, you grasp that. So I guess playing as a child wasn't really affected.
No, as a child, I really never noticed it much.
So where does that lead you into
DJing or AIDS. I don't know what comes first, the DJing or the AIDS activism, or more so into music, since that's kind of that's the industry.
Well, the next progressive step for me was the AIDS activism stuff came into play. At 16, I was diagnosed with AIDS because of the bad blood transfusion in 1984. I'm actually one of the oldest living people in the country by that long without treatment. I went almost 16 years.
All right. Welcome back. This is the final leg of the show, the final leg of What Could Have Been. Just a quick reminder, I want you to check out all these guys on Twitter, at Party of One Pod, at TCFT Podcast, at Joe Cleva, and oh my God, I'm sorry, Derek. I don't have a Twitter in front of me right now to properly promote you. At DJ Rex85, I believe. If not, just search Derek Kanyes, and you'll find him. Super cool dude. All four of them, super cool. They're all super friends. Check out their podcast, Jeff, Jason, and Joe. Check out their podcast. Go subscribe to their podcast. Go learn a thing or two about tabletop or bluegrass. Leave positive reviews for them because they all deserve it. They're all super friends. They have all agreed to come back on the show. I've already sat down to talk to Joe Cleva for a second time. I'm sitting down to talk to Derek in a couple days here, and probably be talking to Jason shortly thereafter. And Jeff is just a busy man, making his podcast magic. So, we'll get together for sure. He's absolutely agreed to do it again. So I can't stress enough how awesome these four guys have been. It just makes me smile that I'm really lucky, to have, collaborators, to friends that are just cool enough to come back and do this without hesitation. And we have some more exciting guests coming up. We're in the process of scheduling something with Ace Marrero. Sorry if I butchered your name, Ace, but Ace will be coming on the show. We're scheduling something up. He's an actor out in LA, East Coast boy that moved out west. He's involved with some cool projects. He's going to sit down and talk the wonderful world of acting and whatnot, and producing and writing and stuff. Working on a few others, nothing definitive yet, but we have good, couple weeks in front of us. So I can't. I don't know. I'm sorry, guys. Episode 10, big moment for me. I like having milestones, and episode 10 was a milestone. And I guess as much as it is a celebration in failure, it's a celebration in knowing that I'm in a community of peers and friends that understand that things happen and are more than willing to come back on the show to help me out, to help me get content out there for you guys, to help, they obviously have a message they want heard, but, I look at this show as not a show that really is out to promote something specifically necessarily, as much as just promote awesome people who do awesome things. So I guess, like I said, I think that in celebrating this failure, we can also celebrate the fact that I'm part of an awesome community and have definitely made, if not already had, I strengthened and made close friendships out of this. They are my super friends. Mike and I were the original super friends of That's Entertainment, Crudimer Studios, of Everything is Awesome, if you will. And now I think that the next four people that can be in like the Super Friends Hall of Fame for sure, if anything, is Jeff Stormer, Jason Ashley, Joe Cleva, and Derek Kanyes. Please give them a round of applause. Make yourself look like a fool as you do that in the middle of your workday. And just make sure, if you could do me a huge favor and check them out, because they've now doubled the time spent with me to get these podcasts out to you and me and to me. So big props to them. Make sure you check me out on Twitter at HHWSD. You check the show out on Twitter at That Entertains. You go to iTunes, you leave the rating, you leave the review. Hopefully it's 5 stars. Hopefully it's positive. I won't tell you what to do, But I'm hoping that you give us some love because we really are just, I love doing this and I love talking to people and I hope you love listening to all of it. So for Everything is Awesome, I'm Kev. You can check us out on awesomepodcast.com.
Everything is Awesome is produced by Crude Humor Studios. For more information about the podcast, please visit us online at awesomepodcast.com. Or if you're interested in advertising on the show, please email us at advertising@crudehumorstudios.com. Stream and download all episodes on iTunes. While you're there, please consider leaving a 5-star review. If you're a fan of the show, please let us know by following us on Twitter and Instagram @ThatEntertains.